Beneath the ashes of war, there are corridors no map will name, tunnels of silence where the air still tastes of iron and fear. Files were burned, witnesses erased, and the truth buried under steel and stone. But every secret leaves a trace, and in the dark, those traces whisper, if you dare to listen. At 3:40 on the morning of May 2, 1945, an armored Deutsche Reichsbahn train designated D-112 departed Breslau under orders classified Stufe 1, Höchstgeheimhaltung, Level 1, Top Secrecy. The operation's codename, Silberzug, appeared only in a handful of SS transmissions originating from the offices of SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler. Intelligence intercepts later confirmed that Kammler had assumed personal control over the transport, overruling both Reichsbahn authorities and Wehrmacht logistical command. Witness statements gathered in June 1945 from Polish rail workers indicated that the train consisted of 8 sealed freight wagons, 2 flatbeds with covered cargo, and an armored command car. Several crates bore the insignia of the SS Sonderstab Kammler, its stylized double rune flanked by a gear wheel, typically used for engineering projects. Others were stenciled with alphanumeric codes not found in any known inventory records of the Reichsbank or German Army Quartermaster Corps. The stated route, according to an unverified copy of a Reichsbahn operations sheet recovered from Breslau station, was southwest toward the Owl Mountains, Eulenburg, a region already known to contain extensive underground construction, most notably the Ries complex. Allied reconnaissance in April 1945 had identified tunnel entrances camouflaged beneath forest cover, but no major engagement was recorded in the immediate vicinity. Instead, Polish Home Army reports speak of sudden road closures and an influx of Waffen-SS guards armed with MP-40 submachine guns, who ordered locals to remain indoors under penalty of execution. The Silberzug reached Volbjik station shortly after midday on May 2, then disappeared from the official timetable. The final confirmed sighting came from a German deserter interrogated by the U.S. 7th Army in June 1945, who described a train that entered the mountain itself. His testimony placed the entry point near a disused quarry north of Glusica, where a temporary timber facade masked a rail spur. By August 1945, both Soviet and American teams had entered the Owl Mountains to investigate. The Soviet First Ukrainian Front declared the area under exclusive military jurisdiction on August 12, barring Polish authorities and Allied observers. Soviet engineers from the 10th Guards Tank Corps reportedly sealed several tunnel entrances with demolition charges. U.S. Counterintelligence Corps (CIC) officers attempting to gain access were informed that the facilities contained nothing of military value. Yet, British SIS files declassified in 1987 tell a different story. An intercepted GRU report from September 1945 refers to energetic components and accelerator frames removed from Sector 4 of the Ries tunnels. The equipment was reportedly shipped under escort to Sukhumi, a Soviet research site on the Black Sea later associated with atomic weapons development. This aligns with separate U.S. Army G-2 field notes mentioning circular track assemblies resembling cyclotron magnets, technology that, in 1945, was at the forefront of nuclear physics. Photographic evidence is scarce. A single black and white image, held in the Bundesarchiv under reference Bark B145-6789, shows a flatbed railcar bearing a cylindrical object wrapped in canvas, with 2 uniformed men standing beside it. The image is dated May 1, 1945 and marked Breslau Güterbahnhof, though no photographer is credited. Handwriting on the reverse, in Czech, reads, "To Owl Mountains before dawn." Despite decades of rumors, no official acknowledgement of Silberzug's full contents has been made. In 1972, Polish miners drilling near the Wallam tunnels encountered a reinforced steel wall containing an unexploded demolition charge. Polish security services sealed the site, citing public safety. The lead engineer, Janusz Kwiatkowski, later emigrated to Canada and, in a 1989 interview, claimed to have seen cables as thick as a man's arm protruding from the wall, remnants, he believed, of high-voltage systems. Kammler's own fate compounds the mystery. Official Nazi records list him as missing in action in May 1945. U.S. documents obtained under FOIA reveal conflicting reports, Some place him in American custody in Garmisch-Partenkirchen on May 9. Others suggest he escaped eastward under Soviet protection. Theories persist that his expertise in advanced weapons engineering, ranging from V-2 rocketry to exotic power systems, was considered too valuable for either side to risk losing. In 1994, an anonymous package was delivered to the offices of a Warsaw-based historical journal. Inside were 2 carbon copies of telegrams dated April 29, 1945, bearing Kammler's signature and addressed to General Major Mahler, Reichshauptbauleitung. Both instructed the immediate relocation of Projekt 6 Kern and Alle Prototypen to Sector Silber, with the notation, Befehl nach Durchführung vernichten, destroy order after execution. The return address was a military post office in Breslau, already abandoned by the time the Allies arrived. The Owl Mountains remain pockmarked with sealed entrances, many now under tourist management, but certain sectors are still fenced with warning signs in Polish and German. Occasional ground-penetrating radar surveys, often conducted unofficially, have identified anomalies consistent with hollow structures far beneath the forest floor. These anomalies align suspiciously with the presumed path of the Silberzug after Volbschik. Even today, former residents of Glusica and Wallum speak in hushed tones about the night the mountain closed. One elderly witness recalled hearing a low mechanical hum for hours after the train vanished, followed by muffled detonations and the acrid smell of burning oil. He remembers, too, the sudden absence of birdsong that morning, an unnatural silence broken only by the distant rumble of retreating artillery. The Polish Institute of National Remembrance has, on several occasions, petitioned both German and Russian archives for full disclosure of documents relating to Silberzug. Responses have been incomplete, heavily redacted, or outright denied on grounds of national security. The U.S. National Archives maintains that no such operation exists in its holdings, though several index references to Silberzug appear in unrelated CIC reports, all crossed out in blue pencil. Whether the Silberzug carried stolen gold, advanced weapon prototypes, or something more dangerous remains unresolved. What is certain is that, for 70 years, 3 governments have maintained silence over a train that vanished into the earth in the war's dying days, taking with it answers that may never be recovered. In the spring of 1947, a listening post operated by the British Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, at Scarborough intercepted a burst of high-frequency Soviet radio traffic. The traffic, partially encrypted with a variation of the Soviet Vernam cipher, referenced something called Projekt Morgenrot, Project Red Dawn. What puzzled cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park's successor units was the language. It contained German technical terms that had no equivalent in Russian, suggesting the Soviets were relaying orders directly from surviving Nazi scientists. An internal MI6 memorandum dated May 4, 1947, declassified in 1996, linked Morgenrot to a series of intelligence cables from late 1944 concerning the SS Forschungsamt, Research Office, and Kammler's Construction Corps. Analysts noted recurring references to Phase II, Langstrahleneffekt, Phase II, long wave effect, a term absent from Allied wartime science reports. The conclusion: this was not a Soviet origin project, but a continuation of a Nazi research line absorbed wholesale into the USSR's post-war military-industrial complex. Tracing the personnel proved nearly impossible. Wartime records from Peenemünde West and Flossenburg labor camps, both tied to weapons production, were conspicuously incomplete. Names like Dr. Ernst Volkmann, Hauptingenieur Friedrich Kellner, and physicist Lothar Wegener appeared in Red Army requisition lists but vanished from Allied POW databases. One notable gap was the absence of standard Entnazifizierung, denazification, paperwork for these individuals, despite their high-ranking technical roles. Photographic evidence surfaced only once. A grainy image, recovered from a destroyed Luftwaffe records facility outside Magdeburg, depicts a convoy of covered trucks parked beneath a gantry crane. In the background is a partially assembled metal frame, circular in structure, with radial supports suggestive of an antenna or reflector dish. A notation on the reverse reads, Magdeburg, Abfahrt 1 Mai 1945, Ziel Haars. British field officers cross-referenced the license plates to vehicles recorded leaving the Haars region in early May 1945, just days before Germany's surrender. According to a report filed by Major R.C. Latham, Intelligence Corps, one of those trucks was later spotted in the Urals in 1948 by an SIS informant embedded in a Soviet mining operation. The informant described a remote compound under NKVD guard, with a structure resembling an enormous radar array pointing toward the horizon, and a large bunker with reinforced concrete walls at least 3 meters thick. His last communication, a coded postcard from Sverdlovsk, arrived in London in November 1948. He was never heard from again. The Soviet side of the story remains largely speculative. A partially unsealed KGB training file from 1963, released during a brief period of archival openness in the early 1990s, contains a case study titled Acquisition of Strategic Technologies from Defeated States. It praises the integration of German electromagnetic research into ongoing Soviet defense projects, though Morgenrot is never named explicitly. Technical diagrams within the file depict low-frequency transmission systems with ranges far exceeding contemporary radar, possibly for detecting high-altitude aircraft or early missile launches. One tantalizing lead emerged in 1950, when a defecting Soviet technician, Alexei Popov, was interrogated at a safehouse in Vienna. Popov claimed to have worked with 3 Germans who spoke Russian poorly on a project involving long-wave pulses to disrupt navigation. He recalled that the lead German engineer insisted on using a proprietary measuring device from Piemont, and that Soviet replacements never matched its precision. Popov's testimony was judged credible but inconclusive. He died under mysterious circumstances in a car accident 2 weeks after being granted asylum. The possibility that Morgenrot was a weapons system, rather than a defensive technology, was first raised in an MI6 analysis paper from 1954. The authors speculated that long-wave effects could be weaponized to interfere with aircraft avionics or even cause resonance effects in certain structures. While the science was at the edge of known capabilities, they noted that wartime Germany had pioneered unusual high-frequency and low-frequency systems in parallel, often hidden under innocuous civilian research covers. Efforts to pinpoint the Soviet facility tied to Morgenrot were hampered by deliberate disinformation. Maps recovered from a dead double agent in 1951 showed the Urals dotted with false military sites, some labeled with German code names. Even aerial reconnaissance from RB-45C Tornado aircraft yielded little. The suspected area was almost perpetually shrouded in cloud, and the few clear images revealed nothing but treeless plains and small worker settlements. By 1961, the official British position was that Morgenrot, if it existed, had been either abandoned or fully assimilated into unrelated Soviet research. Nonetheless, GCHQ intercept logs from as late as 1965 show brief spikes in low-frequency transmissions originating from the same region of the Urals. These were never explained, and in several cases, the recordings were marked for destruction under special security directives. A handful survive, stored on magnetic tape at an undisclosed location. In 1989, a retired GCHQ analyst, Peter Albridge, speaking to a BBC documentary crew, stated off-camera that Morgenrot was real, and it frightened the Americans more than the British. When pressed, he claimed that U.S. military attachés in Moscow had lodged formal, private protests with the Kremlin in 1952 about violations of the spirit of the Potsdam Agreement relating to German technology transfers. The content of those protests has never been released. The last official British file mentioning Morgenrot is dated February 17, 1974. It is a brief memo noting that recent intelligence from an Allied service suggests the dismantling of a large installation west of Chelyabinsk, believed to be associated with German émigré specialists. The file ends with a handwritten addendum: no further interest, political climate unfavorable. Today, Morgenrot exists only in fragments, intercept logs, blurred photographs, and the whispered recollections of men who never set foot in the Urals but felt the shadow of something carried there in the war's dying days. A shadow that, if the scattered evidence is to be believed, began in the laboratories of Nazi Germany and found its second life beneath the watchtowers of Stalin's Soviet Union. On May 9, 1945, 2 days after the official surrender of German forces in Europe, units of the U.S. 9th Air Force moved to secure Fliegerhorst Schleswig, a Luftwaffe base in Schleswig-Holstein that had served as both a fighter command post and a testing ground for experimental aircraft. The main runways were intact, the hangars largely empty. But in the southern corner of the airfield, under guard by a skeletal contingent of Luftwaffe technicians, stood a reinforced concrete structure the Americans would designate Vault 12. According to a U.S. Army Air Force's inventory report dated May 11, 1945, the vault was locked by a mechanism that required both a key and a mechanical combination. The German custodian, Oberfeldwebel Kurt Messenger, refused to cooperate during initial questioning. He eventually yielded after being told that all personnel would be turned over to Soviet forces if they did not comply. Inside, search teams found no aircraft parts, weapons, or ammunition, only 6 steel film canisters, each stamped with the words "Nur für das Auge des Führers," for the Führer's eyes only. The film, once processed, revealed something unexpected. Shot entirely at night on 16mm stock, the footage depicted what appeared to be test launches of rocket-propelled craft from an unlit airstrip. In several sequences, a radar control station is visible, with equipment not matching any known Luftwaffe or Kriegsmarine design. The silhouettes of the craft, long, narrow fuselages with no visible wings, accelerated rapidly into darkness, the exhaust plumes lasting mere seconds before disappearing. The apparent climb angle suggested performance beyond that of the Mi-262 or even the A-4/V-2. Technical officers at the captured base attempted to identify the radar system. Notes in the margin of a Wright Field Intelligence Summary describe oscilloscope displays with signal clarity beyond current Allied capability, and antenna arrays tuned for unusual frequency ranges. The origin of the equipment was unclear, though some crates bore a modified Telefunken logo and the words Gerät R9. Within days, the canisters and the vault's entire contents were airlifted to Wright Field, Ohio, aboard a C-54 Skymaster under guard by the 203rd Military Intelligence Detachment. Every American serviceman present was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement under the Espionage Act of 1917, stipulating lifelong confidentiality in the interest of national security. Copies of the agreement, discovered in 1999 among the personal papers of Lieutenant Colonel James R. Havens, confirmed that the footage was classified top secret, restricted data upon arrival. The German personnel at Fliegerhorst Schleswig were quietly redistributed among various Allied interrogation centers. Messenger himself was transferred to Camp Dustbin in Frankfurt, where scientists and engineers suspected of working on advanced weapons were held. In a British Combined Services Detailed Interrogation Center (CSDIC) report from July 1945, Messenger claimed the filmed launches were part of a program known as Projekt Sturmvogel. He described it as a late-stage effort to combine rocket propulsion with radar-guided ascent, but claimed ignorance of the craft's ultimate purpose or destination. Cross-referencing this claim with surviving Luftwaffe files yields little. Sturmvogel appears only once in surviving war diaries, a single entry in a heavily water-damaged logbook from the Erprobungskommando, Test Command, at Rechlin, dated February 1945. The entry, signed by a Major H. Wiedermann, reads simply, "Sturmvogel, night trials continue, coordination with R9 satisfactory." Wiedermann's post-war fate is unknown, and no Allied arrest record exists for him. Rumors about Vault 12 persisted in both military and intelligence circles. In 1952, an Air Force Technical Intelligence Center memo, declassified in part in the 1980s, briefly mentions German radar-controlled launch craft, possibly unmanned, recovered in film media from Schleswig. The rest of the paragraph is redacted, except for a note in the margin, cross-check with ongoing RAND study pilotless interceptors. A more provocative lead emerged in 1968, when a retired civilian engineer named Robert E. Forrester gave an anonymous interview to a regional newspaper in Dayton, Ohio. Forrester claimed he had been tasked with reverse engineering components from a German radar-guided projectile system in the late 1940s. He alleged that the original components were not entirely metallic, and that one housing bore a thin ceramic skin like nothing we'd ever seen. He believed the technology had been incorporated into early American missile guidance research, though he could provide no physical proof. The base itself, Fliegerhorst Schleswig, returned to civilian use in the 1950s. Yet the reinforced foundation of Vault 12 remained sealed, its interior inaccessible, the original metal doors removed and replaced with concrete slabs. In 1991, during renovation work, construction crews uncovered a buried steel cabinet several meters from the former vault. Inside were degraded paper records, mostly flight logs and technical checklists in German. Among them was a single partially legible page headed Sturmvogel April 14, 45, listing Startbahn C, Runway C, R9 Anlage, R9 installation, and Zielhöhe, 52 kilometers, target altitude, 52 kilometers. If accurate, such a climb would have been extraordinary for 1945. Official German military historians have been dismissive of claims about Sturmvogel, suggesting it was either a cover name for an experimental V-2 derivative or a project abandoned before significant testing. However, several post-war radar engineers, when shown stills from the Vault 12 footage in the late 1990s, remarked on the sophistication of the tracking equipment and the improbability of its development under wartime conditions without Allied knowledge. To this day, the original 16mm reels from Vault 12 have not been publicly released. Researchers who have filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the material receive standardized replies stating that the records remain classified in the interest of national defense. Whether the secrecy is due to sensitive wartime technology or the possible influence such systems had on early Cold War missile development remains unresolved. All that is known is that in the dying weeks of the war, on unlit runways in northern Germany, unknown craft took to the skies, captured only on grainy film intended for the Führer's eyes alone, and locked away in an American vault ever since. In late February 1952, French military intelligence recorded a series of unusual meetings at a small café in the 14th arrondissement of Paris. The principal figure was an aging German émigré identifying himself as former Wehrmacht Oberleutnant Otto Drexler, formerly of the 3rd Signals Battalion. Drexler had contacted a low-level French attaché through an intermediary, claiming possession of transcribed orders from April 1945 relating to something called Feuerkeller, literally, fire cellar. According to Drexler, he had been stationed in Thuringia in the final weeks of the war, tasked with intercepting and relaying encrypted transmissions between various Wehrmacht and SS units. On April 12, 1945, he received a burst transmission from Berlin addressed to Hauptbauleitung Jonastal Main Construction Directorate, ordering deep shaft detonations per contingency protocol and the burial of object to be secured against discovery. The message was sent using a modified Enigma cipher, with key settings Drexler claimed had been issued only to the Reich Main Security Office, RSHA. The transcripts he provided, typed in purple ink on thin, brittle carbon paper, were fragmented, with several lines obscured by stains and burn marks. However, phrases such as Zündung 0300, detonation at 0300, and Verbringung abgeschlossen, transfer complete, were clear. One page referenced Sector D and Bogrup 6, terms that matched nomenclature found in Allied post-war surveys of the unfinished tunnel complexes in the Jonastal Valley. French intelligence opened a preliminary investigation, filing Drexler's material under case number F/1952/872J. Before a second interview could be arranged, Drexler was found dead on March 3 in a modest boarding house on Rue de l'Ouest. The cause was officially recorded as asphyxiation due to a faulty gas heater, though the attending gendarme noted the unusual absence of any gas smell upon arrival. Drexler's possessions, including the transcripts, were seized by the Charité Nationale and transferred to a secure archive in Vincennes. Parallel files uncovered decades later in U.S. Army G.2 archives show that American forces had also encountered rumors of Feuerkeller. A report from the 97th Infantry Division, dated May 1945, mentions a sealed rail spur with evidence of recent demolition near the village of Kroinkel, less than 5 kilometers from known tunnel sites. The demolition appeared to have been carried out with shaped charges, leaving a jagged breach through which faint heat could still be felt hours after discovery. Witness statements from local residents collected by CIC officers in the summer of 1945 refer to 3 nights of distant rumbling in mid-April, followed by an influx of SS troops in plain uniform who restricted movement in the valley. Several villagers claimed they saw trucks arriving under heavy guard, their cargo covered with thick tarpaulins. One elderly farmer described the acrid stench of burning chemicals lingering in the air for days afterward. The Americans were not the only ones interested. Soviet 8th Guards Army records, declassified briefly in the early 1990s, contain a terse entry from April 20, 1945, noting the presence of buried structures in Jonas-Tal of uncertain military value, and indications of deliberate internal destruction. No follow-up report exists in the accessible files, though later Soviet mapping of the area omits certain sectors entirely, replacing them with blank contours. In 1967, a retired French intelligence officer named Jean-Luc Martin privately published a memoir in which he obliquely referred to a German officer with papers concerning a fire beneath the earth, sealed before the Allies arrived. The passage was brief, and Martin declined to elaborate in interviews, citing state secrecy. Nonetheless, it drew the attention of a small circle of independent researchers who began probing the history of Feuerkeller. One such researcher, Polish historian Andrzej Kroll, obtained access to East German geological surveys from the 1970s. He noted unexplained thermal anomalies in the Jonas-Tal bedrock, consistent with residual heat from underground combustion or chemical reactions. While the official explanation attributed these to natural geothermal activity, Kroll pointed out that the anomalies aligned precisely with several blocked tunnel entrances described in U.S. Army engineering sketches from 1946. The most controversial piece of evidence surfaced in 1983, when a former East German Stasi archivist defected to the West, bringing microfilm copies of classified Ministry for State Security documents. Among them was a 1954 report describing the discovery of hermetically sealed containers of unknown alloy in a collapsed section of a Jonas-Tal tunnel. The report notes that the containers were removed by Soviet personnel and transported under escort toward the Polish border. Chemical hazard markings were painted over before departure. Physical access to Jonas-Tal remains restricted. While some tunnel entrances have been opened for limited tours, large portions of the complex are sealed with reinforced concrete, bearing warning signs in German and Polish about structural instability and dangerous gases. Modern ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by civilian teams in 2004 detected several voids at depths exceeding 50 meters, one of which produced a faint but measurable heat signature. Theories about the true nature of Feuerkeller vary. Some suggest it was related to late-war efforts to hide advanced technology or weapon prototypes. Others believe it may have involved the destruction of sensitive archives or war crimes evidence. A minority view, drawn from fragmentary Soviet accounts, holds that the site may have contained hazardous experimental materials, possibly chemical or radiological in nature, hence the burial against discovery. Whatever was sealed in Thuringia in April 1945 has never been officially recovered. The transcripts Drexler tried to pass on, the unexplained detonations, and the guarded removal of unknown containers all point to a deliberate effort to conceal something that neither side wanted public. The files remain classified, the entrances remain blocked, and the fire cellar of Jonas-Tal continues to smolder in the margins of history. On February 17, 1948, the CIA's newly formed Special Activities Division authorized a joint mission with the Italian Servizio Informazioni Forze Armate, SAFAR, to investigate the disappearance of an OSS field team last seen in the Dolomite Alps. The team, led by Captain William H. Mason, had been dispatched to recover rumored caches of Nazi intelligence hidden in high-altitude caves during the war's final months. Their last transmission, sent via portable SCR-300 radio, consisted of two coded words: "Snow burns." Italian Alpine troops from the 6th Alpine Regiment guided the CIA Safar detachment into the rugged Passo del Erbe region, an area riddled with wartime smuggling routes and abandoned Wehrmacht positions. Local accounts from shepherds and mountain guides spoke of sealed cave mouths at altitudes above 2,000 meters, blocked with poured concrete and marked with faded red and black warning symbols. One elderly resident recalled German troops arriving in late April 1945, hauling steel drums from trucks bearing the insignia of the Wehrmacht's Nebeltruppen, chemical warfare units. On February 21, the joint team located one such site, a steep, narrow crevasse partially obscured by snow drifts. Beneath the snow, blast debris indicated the cave entrance had been deliberately sealed. Geiger counter readings were inconclusive, but a handheld chemical detector carried by an Italian sergeant registered brief spikes for chlorine and phosgene traces. According to the mission log, declassified in 1999, the air temperature near the seal was several degrees warmer than the surrounding environment, despite sub-zero conditions. Attempts to breach the seal were abandoned after a rockslide, possibly triggered by structural instability. The team instead focused on mapping the surrounding network of wartime trails and mule tracks, hoping to locate alternate entrances. 2 days later, they found another sealed chamber, this time bearing Italian-language stenciling reading Vietato l'ingresso, gas. This was unusual. Wartime Wehrmacht units rarely used local language warnings, suggesting the seal may have been applied post-war, possibly by retreating Axis Allied forces or even Allied units themselves. Archival records from the OSS mission logs, recovered decades later, show that Captain Mason's original orders referenced Dokumentenkammern, document chambers, believed to contain files from Abwehrstellsutterall and SD, Sicherheitsdienst, outposts in northern Italy. These were to be prioritized for extraction over material or weaponry. Theories within the post-war intelligence community suggested that such caches could have included lists of Axis collaborators, codebooks, or even decrypted Allied communications captured during the war. The mission abruptly ended on February 26, 1948, when a sudden blizzard forced a withdrawal to a lower altitude base camp. Officially, the team left with no recoveries of strategic value. However, a classified after-action report held in the CIA's Crest archive contains a final paragraph, heavily redacted, stating that metallic containers of non-standard dimensions were located and assessed, and that further handling was deemed unsafe under prevailing conditions. An Italian Army quartermaster's requisition form, dated February 27, 1948, shows an urgent request for reinforced steel drums and lead lining, ostensibly for weather station repairs. No such weather station existed in the area. When questioned in the 1970s, surviving members of the Alpine unit denied any knowledge of the requisition or the mission's outcome. The physical site of the caves has since been rendered inaccessible. Post-war Italian forestry projects, combined with natural erosion, have obscured most wartime trails. Aerial surveys conducted in the 1980s identified several anomalous heat signatures beneath the snowpack in the region, but Italian civil authorities dismissed these as geothermal vents. The original snow burns transmission remains a mystery. No codebook recovered from OSS or CIA archives defines the phrase. One fragment of possible corroboration surfaced in 1964 when a retired U.S. Army chemical warfare specialist, Lieutenant Colonel David Renner, told a closed seminar at Fort Detrick that he had seen photographs of burned snow around sealed caves in the Alps, blackened as if by high-temperature exhaust or chemical reaction. When pressed, he refused to name the operation, citing classification. In 2005, a declassified CIA photo from the mission surfaced online via an Italian researcher. It shows a group of Alpine and plainclothes men standing before a snowbank, with a section melted down to bare rock in a rough circle about 3 meters across. No heat source is visible. The man believed to be Captain Mason is holding a map board. On its edge, partially visible, are the words Black Ice, Alpine in block capitals. Today, the precise location of the caves remains unknown to the public. The Dolomite Highlands keep their winter silence, but for those who study the war's shadow archives, the combination of sealed mountain chambers, chemical warfare insignia, and vanished intelligence teams remains one of the Cold War's most enduring Alpine mysteries. The doors were sealed, the records shredded, and the names struck from every ledger. Yet the shadows remain, clinging to history like blood to fabric. Somewhere, under the weight of forgotten earth, the answers still breathe, waiting for the day someone is willing to dig where no one was meant to go.